All right, let's talk about nuclear power now. You might have heard the President over the weekend reiterating that as a country, we are aiming for a mix of power. So it's coal, it's renewables, but it's also nuclear. Of course, we have one active power station at the moment, and that is Koeberg nuclear power station, the Koeberg power station, which is outside Cape Town. It is, of course, undergoing extensive maintenance to extend its lifespan at the moment. So I'm going to first of all talk to you about a story that is related to nuclear power. News from a former member of the National Nuclear Regulators Board. He has won his case against the Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe. Nuclear activist Peter Becker has long been a watcher of developments at Koeberg, but he was kicked off the regulators' board for apparently being too critical of what is happening at Koeberg. But he's now back. He's won this court case and he joins us now. Peter Becker, thank you so much for your time. I've tried to sort of condense what actually happened with that court case, but my understanding is that as a member of the Koeberg Alert Alliance, you wrote an article. This is before you became a board member. And had even declared this, and then suddenly it became an issue after you were appointed. There's a Daily Maverick article that explains it really well, but Gwede Mantashe, along with the board, I understand, did have a problem, felt that you were conflicted, and there's a direct quote from Gwede Mantashe saying, if you resist nuclear and are on a board, and are a board member, I fire you. Simple. So talk to me about this issue of you being conflicted. Is it, in your view, a problem to have a view that is perhaps against nuclear and be on a nuclear regulators board? How does that work?
Good evening, Sally. Good to be with you. Well, before I was appointed to the board, I was active in the whole nuclear space and basically an anti-nuclear activist for about 12 years. So it really should have been no surprise to anyone at all that what my views were. And in fact, before I was appointed, the minister asked me for a CV, and that CV included attending international anti-nuclear conferences and so forth. So it was very plain what my views were. And I must say, when I was appointed, myself and also the rest of civil society were quite impressed with the minister, because we thought here he's allowing diverse views. And surely that's the strongest kind of board or any committee where there are various different perspectives that can be brought to bear.
So when did it start becoming a problem? I mean, were there a few fiery board meetings when you were launching salvos at pro-nuclear members? What on earth happened to suddenly have the situation where you were booted?
Yeah. So firstly, the NNR deals with nuclear safety issues. The issue of desirability, whether nuclear is a good idea, whether we need more of it in the next mix or less of it in the mix, is absolutely nothing to do with the National Nuclear Regulator. That's in the ambit of the DMRE and NERSA, the energy regulator, and so on. The only matters considered by the NNR and by the board is what are the regulations and what is this application for, and is it considered safe according to those regulations? So certainly I never raised any of the opinions that I have about nuclear power and its lack of desirability for South Africa. So that didn't happen at all. What did happen is the very first board meeting I attended, there was a letter, and this is all in the public court record now, from Eskom complaining about my role as an anti-nuclear activist in the past and now sitting on the NNR board. And that led to a process where it was decided to get a legal opinion about whether I was I had a conflict of interest. And the thoughts there were that by feeling anti-nuclear and sitting on the board, I was inherently conflicted and I shouldn't sit on the board. Of course, this didn't answer the question why I was appointed in the first place, when my views were very well known. So after that process, a legal opinion was sought, I think a deeply flawed opinion, and it seemed very unfair. It wasn't actually shown to the board, it was sent to the minister, and the minister decided to dismiss me. And at that point, I'm not a legal person, I don't have legal training, but I just felt, and I knew that it was an unfair dismissal and an unfair process. And that's when I launched the legal application. Exactly a year before the ruling, on the 18th of January, I was suspended last year.
And now, am I right that it's a constitutional court order that has reinstated you?
No, but the High Court of the Western Cape found that it was unconstitutional, found that the minister acted with ulterior motive, in bad faith, and set aside my dismissal, both for procedural reasons. The judge said it was vitiated by procedural unfairness, the whole process, and also the reasons that were given, which were tried to be misconstrued as misconduct, were simply not misconduct at all. For example, I met with some civil society members, and as a person whose designation is representing communities, I thought it incumbent on me to meet with communities so that I could hear their concerns. But somehow that was construed as misconduct. But the judge shot that down and said that was nonsense.
Do you expect to get back on the board? Do you want to? Or do you think that this matter is just going to be appealed and eventually will fizzle out?
I think the NNR has an incredibly important function. Its mandate is to protect the public and environment from the potential harms of radioactivity. So absolutely, I'm looking forward to working again with the board, and I think we need to put whatever difficulties we had behind us and need to work towards what we all should be working towards.
I know that you keep a careful eye on what's going on at Koeberg, and you often raise uncomfortable questions around what's being done, and you really do keep an eye on what's going on at our power station. We know that there's extensive refurbishments going on. Could you talk to us about your understanding of the progress that's being made during that refurbishment, and your views on the plan for keeping Koeberg going?
So the Koeberg is about 40 years old. It was built, construction started around the mid-70s, and the first unit came online in 1984. And it was built with an intended life of 40 years. And that 40 years comes to an end in the second half of 2024. So it operates under a license from the NNR, the National Nuclear Regulator, and that license expires in 2024. So Eskom have applied to the NNR for permission to extend that by 20 years. And in the meantime, they've started attempting to do a refurbishment. I think you referred to it earlier as maintenance, but it is really major. You're replacing some of the innards. It's like replacing the gearbox on your car. It's more than a maintenance. It's a refurbishment, they refer to it as. And they attempted to begin that on the 18th of January. Coincidentally, that was the day I was suspended from the board. And that was the day that the NNR gave permission to Eskom to go ahead with that process. But it didn't work. They weren't properly prepared. There was a building that wasn't ready. This is all public knowledge. And Framatome left, and in fact left an invoice behind for 1.1 billion rand for wasting their time. So that was the first attempt. The second attempt has started now, 8th of December, and that's on Unit 1. The attempt last year was on Unit 2. And on the 8th of December, they shut Koeberg down, and they've started the process, firstly, of removing the fuel, and then they'll cut out the existing 3 steam generators. Each of those weigh 450 tons, and they have to be lifted out, and 3 replacement steam generators have to be lifted back in. And that's an incredibly heavy lift. People in the industry, construction industry, will know that 450 tons requires a very So this is a very complex process, and it's underway at the moment. You also asked about what do I think about the desirability of it all, so I can answer that too if you'd like.
Yes, please.
So what we've got at the moment is the worst crisis that we've had in the history of Eskom. We've got, I don't need to go over this, it's all over the news. We're looking at stage 6, stage 8 load shedding and so on. And this is absolutely the worst time to take the units of Koeberg offline in terms of supplying power to the grid. So each unit at Koeberg is 900 and something megawatts. Let's call it 1 gigawatt or 1,000 megawatts, and that's equivalent to 1 stage of load shedding. So by taking Koeberg offline on the 8th, Eskom added 1 stage of load shedding to our situation at the moment. And it's quite easy to work out, and you can look at the number of hours it's going to be offline. Yeah. You look at the cost of load shedding, which the CSIR has worked out at 87 Rand per kilowatt hour. So this 6-month outage of Koeberg for this refurbishment is going to cost the South African economy 311 billion Rand. And when they do the second one, which they plan for later this year, it's going to cost another 311 billion Rand to the economy in terms of the cost of unserved energy. So if we look at why it's being done in order to keep Koeberg available after 2025, right, after the license expires. But you've probably also seen in the news how much renewable energy is now in the pipeline. We've got 16 gigawatts in the pipeline here, own generation. We've got a new determination that's come out for, I think, 13 to 14 something gigawatts. We've got the cap lifted, so anybody can now make their own power generation plants and wheel that energy via Eskom. So as those things come online, I believe by 2025, we're going to have plenty of energy, and the 1 gigawatt from each side of Koeberg is going to be laughable and unnecessary. So we are causing this huge damage to the economy right now in order to make Koeberg available in the long term, when we probably are not actually going to need the energy that it can output, which is very small in the biggest scope of things. You know, it's about 3.5% of nominal capacity of the country.
Well, we'll definitely have to talk a little bit more about this on another occasion. Fascinating insights. Nuclear activist Peter Becker, he's just won the right to be back on the National Nuclear Regulators Board after being fired by Gwede Mantashe.